was the only one standing with them, and they said, we're going to remove our support. As soon as they got that communique, the Bolivian president ordered that everybody go home. And when we landed, everybody dispersed. There was no hurricane. What does that tell us? God is firmly in control of events today. God is firmly. If His people will pray and work, God will disperse the storm so that we can continue working a little longer. Now when we got to Bolivia, we had the good news that everything had dispersed. Everything with food began to flow in. Gasoline started coming in. And then we heard the good news about Troy. And I got the news from Venezuela that they'd finished the construction there. So there was two churches built in western Venezuela, 2 churches built in eastern Venezuela. There was one built on the border, San Juan, the church built on the border of Guyana, and one built on the other side of the border, bordering Venezuela. So it was a total of 6 churches. And I'll try my best to send you that, or get them, the ones that were sent to me, I'll try to put them together for you. I don't have them ready for you now because I've been traveling night and day. My wife and I flew back from Bolivia to Brazil, to Guyana, all day long in Guyana, working for 2 days, all night long, flying between Guyana and Colombia. I performed a wedding ceremony, slept a few hours, left across Jamaica, across Cuba, back to Florida, back to Tennessee, 4 hours later, after resting for 4 hours, to Australia. So, please forgive me that I haven't been able to put together everything yet, but there are 6 churches, beautiful churches, standing because of what happened here 2 years ago. And I want to thank you, and I will get you those. Okay? I give you my word that I will try to put that together for you so you can see what happened. Thank you very much. It was a blessing, and there's hundreds of people worshiping there now that had no place to worship before. That's a quick summary of what is happening. Mainly, since then, in April, some of you might have downloaded some of the sermons. In April, I preached a sermon to my own classmates. It was called The Approaching Storm. And I was invited to be the speaker for the 30th alumni weekend for my high school graduation. And so I knew that I would never see some of them again. This was a one-time chance. And I opened my heart to them, and I preached a sermon that was very direct, and I just appealed to my classmates to put everything right with the Lord. I told them there's a great storm coming. I told them that as early as September, the evidence showed that an economic crisis could burst across the nation and the world. And I said, you don't have a lot of time to make a lot of decisions. Get your life in order with God. Put your finances where God would have you put it. I preached a sermon, and I didn't think anything else of it until somebody put it on the internet. And suddenly, downloads started to happen, and that sermon had nearly 20,000 downloads overall from all the web pages that we could count. And then it was about 20,000 requests for that sermon. We said, what is different? But somehow that sermon hit a chord, and it went everywhere. And it not only created, throughout North America and Canada and the United States, it not only created a movement to prepare lives and launch into the mission field. Dozens of families left everything and went to their different countries, back home to their countries to work again. And I just kept hearing stories of families that went to work for God. I was thrilled to see people put God's work first. It also created another situation which many of my friends that I considered close friends reacted negatively to that great movement of awakening, and they began to write and preach sermons. One sermon was entitled, "Nothing Will Happen in September." I left for Bolivia a little discouraged because I felt like, Lord, it's okay when enemies of the church attack, but when your own friends attack, it hurts worse. And so I left rather emotionally drained and tired from this situation. But as we all know, September is now history. Something did happen in September, and we don't have to ever mention it again. It's all history now. What hasn't happened yet is the final collapse. Now, I mentioned this at the other place I just preached at, the Fountain, but Generally, Americans have been kept in the dark by their own government of what was about to happen. So Americans in general have been rather ignorant of the events. People outside knew more than Americans did about what's happening in America. And so when I preached this sermon, it was like, what? You mean the nation is financially in trouble? What are you talking about? This is just simply sensationalism. You see, but they were acting out of ignorance. Because if you don't know what's happening in your own nation and you've been told everything is okay, you would like to believe everything is okay, wouldn't you? It's nice to believe. It just is a lie. Things are not okay. Now, some nations are better than other nations, but this is a world economy. No nation stands alone today. Everybody is tied in together. And when a Titanic sinks, all nations are affected. Just like 9/11 affected all nations, so will the final collapse. And it is coming very soon. We now know, evidence shows that for the last 2.5 years, the U.S. government has been printing approximately $1 million a minute to pay their bills, which is $3.6 billion a day. And every time you print money to pay your bills, instead of actually earning your money, you're devaluating the entire currency. Now, there's a strange thing happening. The U.S. currency has a surge in value right now, but it's not because it's worth anymore. It's because Europe is buying U.S. dollars as fast as they can to help keep the U.S. economy from crashing. And the dollar is in demand right now, so the value has gone up. But what I mean is the demand value has gone up. But the true value of the U.S. dollar, is worth toilet paper today. And it cannot last very much longer. There's only a short time for this to happen. Now, the reason I'm sharing this is Adventists believe that Jesus is coming back soon. I should say they believe. Because where you spend your time and where you spend your money tells me if you really believe. And most Adventists say they believe, but most Adventists do not believe Jesus is coming back soon. Because most Adventists have been spending their time and money in things other than God's work. If you really believe Jesus is coming back soon, you will put every effort into advancing God's work, at home and abroad. And the health of the church at home depends to great extent, Sister White tells us, on how we take care of God's work in far-off countries. Papua New Guinea, Africa, South America, Asia. There's a lot of areas where God's work needs help. Now, I'm glad that in Mongolia, we have an aviation program in Mongolia, a medical aviation program. There's a lot of Australians and New Zealanders that go to Mongolia. I was very surprised to see a whole airplane full of New Zealanders on the airplane when I flew to Mongolia. I did not realize they were Adventists. When I got there and the conference president was waiting for me, I said, "Are we ready to go?" "Oh, no," he said. "We still got about 20 New Zealanders that have to get off the airplane." "You mean all of those are Adventists?" "Yes, the whole half the plane." When I went there. And they were going to build churches. So this is what I mean when we get involved in God's work. Going to help the work in other countries actually helps our church grow at home. It's strange how God works. The economy of heaven is very different than we would normally think. In heaven's view, the more you give, the more you receive. I was flying across the Amazon the other day. I looked down and I noticed the river was all full of water. And I thought to myself, why is the Amazon River always full of water when I look at it? It's the biggest river in the world. Why is it so full of water? It gives more water to the ocean than any other river in the world. But it always has enough to fill it. Isn't this an example of God's giving? Because the ocean gives it to the sky gives it to the forests take only what they need and give it to the rivers pour into the big Amazon takes what it needs and passes it on back to the river again. The whole cycle of the universe that God has created is about giving. And the more we give, given it shall be given unto you. That is the way things work in God's world. So I wanted to share some of these little updates with you. We live in a little bubble of peace right now. We don't know how long it will last. But we do know one thing. God is in control, and the final collapse will not happen until He gives His permission. Now, what is He waiting on? Is He going to wait for another 40 years? No. There's no evidence. God is allowing the progressive events to happen before our very eyes. And